Great. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's my great pleasure to welcome everyone at the Arctic birthday party for the High Seas Treaty, and that the WWF Global Arctic Program has convened. Thank you for joining, and I hope that you will have a good time with us for the coming 90 minutes. My name is Jan Dusika. I'm the lead of governance in the Global Arctic Program, and I'll be moderating today's meeting. We will start with the opening remarks from the WWF International Director General Kirsten Schuit. Then we will have introduction of a birthday present from the Global Arctic Program by Vicky Lee Valgren, the director of the GAP. Then we will hear the keynote presentation from our collaborator Eric Molenaar, and then we will go for a panel discussion with several speakers, which I will introduce one by one as they come in. And we will conclude with two things. One, the opportunity to have a Q&A session, and then there will be a surprise closure of our event at the very end. So with that, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome Kirsten Schuit, the Director General of WWF International. And I would like to ask Kirsten to give us some opening remarks for the event. Kirsten, over to you.
Hi, everyone, and so good to see you. Sorry, it took me a while to unmute myself, but wonderful to be part of the Arctic community. It's a place that's very close to my heart, as I know it is to many of you. And I'd like to say just a few words about the High Seas Treaty, of course, which is what we're celebrating right now with the birthday party. As you all know, it was adopted a year ago, and it's 2 decades. I wasn't aware that it took so long, 2 decades of negotiations. And I know many of you and many of the other WWF colleagues have been involved in that. But of course, it's a massively historic milestone, because this is a treaty that goes beyond national jurisdiction and focuses on marine biodiversity. And it effectively protects high seas, which is more than 60% of the world's oceans. So you can imagine how important this treaty is, especially for the world's oceans. And it does it by focusing on networks of marine protected areas, environmental impact assessments, but also equitable sharing of marine genetic resources, which of course is so hugely important. What I really like about the treaty is that it binds together different institutions that have mandates related to biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. And so it focuses on bringing all these different stakeholders together, including how Indigenous people and local communities must be consulted, which of course is so incredibly important. The treaty calls for management plans for all marine protected areas, but also will help us identify some of the key effects, negative effects that take place in the oceans, including activities like shipping, like cable laying, industrial fishing, but also other activities that exploit the ocean ecosystems that we know. Now, for the treaty to become operational, we need 60 ratifications. And if I understand correctly, today we only have 7. So we're very far removed from getting from 7 to 60. And so WWF calls on all countries to advance their ratification processes. And we really would like to get over the 60 threshold by June 2025, which is when we'll be holding the 3rd UN Oceans Conference. And it would be wonderful if by then, so that's in a year's time, we can have the treaty enter into force. Now, given the importance for the Arctic, which is the community, of course, that we're gathering here today, we really hope to see all of the Arctic countries willing to bring this treaty to life. It's incredibly important for the 30 by 30 target of the Global Biodiversity Framework. It's very important for SDG 14. And so, WWF stands ready to support all countries, including all the Arctic countries, to make sure that this becomes a reality in a year's time. So today we're bringing together, of course, the representatives of key Arctic institutions to launch an effort for connecting a very dispersed governance framework for the Arctic under the treaty. And in order to do so, we really would welcome an open mindset and a constructive participation of all participants involved, because we know that in the past, joint stewardship of the Arctic can unite the Arctic countries. including indigenous people and governments and other stakeholders of the Arctic. And we really would welcome that we can embrace this again today, that it's not something that only worked in the past, but we can do this again moving forward, because we all know that only by working together, by coming together, we can actually feel that urgency and implement the urgency about acting now. Because we have to act now to make sure that the Arctic is protected before it is too late. We all know it's going so incredibly fast, especially in this beautiful part of the world. And so I thank you for embracing the urgency and coming with us together to make sure that this becomes a reality. Wishing you great meetings, and back to you, Jan.
Thank you very much, Kirsten, for sharing the global picture and the importance that Arctic plays in the global picture, and that we can contribute to with looking together with an open mind at how we can all act in the Arctic for bringing life to the High Seas Treaty. So thank you again. Let me now turn to the next stage, and I would be calling on Vicky Leeuw-Wahlgren, the Director of the WWF Global Arctic Program. We were thinking what we should send as WWF as a birthday gift, and we decided to speak through pictures, or rather through maps, and Vicky will introduce those. So Vicky, over to you.
Thank you, Jan. And good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us at this little birthday party that we have. As Kirsten was saying, we're here talking about the High Seas Treaty. But where are the high seas actually in the Arctic Ocean? And what does the governance of the Arctic Ocean look like today? It's not easy. It's in fact very complicated. So as part of a small birthday present, I guess you could say, we put together this map to help us try to tease out what all these parts are. The link will be shared to this map. You can all look at it and explore it later at your own with your own time. But let me just walk you through it quickly. So if we start off here, you can see in yellow where all of the exclusive economic zones are, and thereby where all of the areas beyond national jurisdictions are, those light green areas, I guess you could say. But as we were talking about, there's a lot of governance structures already in place in the Arctic Ocean. One of these is here, this purple one, the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, that covers the high seas area of the Central Arctic Ocean. So it covers one of these areas beyond national jurisdiction in the Arctic Ocean, but not all of them. So if we add on the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission, you can see that it now includes the Banana Hole, and it includes the Loophole, those two down there at the bottom of your screen, I guess. And you can see that it covers a part of the high seas area of the Central Arctic Ocean, and how there's actually an overlap here between the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement and the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission and their areas. But these two agreements only are looking at one sector, right? They're only looking at the fisheries sector. So if we broaden things a little bit and we include OSPAR, that's talking about the protection of the marine environment in the Northeast Atlantic, you can see that that covers the same area essentially as the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission. But all of these three that I've talked about so far are all following administrative boundaries, political boundaries. And as we all know, nature does not follow those boundaries. So if we look at it from a nature perspective, you could look at it like this, looking at these large marine ecosystems. These are distinct biological features and put together at a scale that's relevant for marine conservation purposes. And you can see how many of these LMEs, as they're called, include both areas within exclusive economic zones and high seas. If you wanted to be talking about monitoring and biodiversity policy and monitoring, then maybe the definition of the Arctic that CAF, the Conservation of Arctic Fauna and Flora Working Group, defines could be relevant here. The IMO also has its definition of Arctic waters in the Polar Code, this red line here, and you can see how the Polar Code does not include all of the areas that are in CAF's definition of Arctic waters, and it leaves out some of the large marine ecosystems as well. But since the High Seas Treaty is very much about protecting and creating marine protected areas, we wanted to also share this map, which shows the areas of priority areas of conservation that WWF helped put together through a map that we call ArcNet. And it can be a blueprint of what a network of marine protected areas across the Arctic Ocean could look like. So this to show you just a little bit what it looks like in the Arctic Ocean with all these different parts.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Vicky, for showing it. You will get the link to this in a second in the chat, and this will be available as an interactive map that you can use into the future. Let me now move to our keynote presenter. Erik Molenaar has been collaborating with WWF for a long time. He's a scholar in Arctic environmental law, and he's the deputy director of the Netherlands Institute for the Law of the Sea. He's teaching at the Utrecht University and in the Utrecht Center for Water, Oceans and Sustainability Law. So I would hand it over to Erik to share with us his initial thoughts. Before doing that, all the participants will have an opportunity to pose questions to all the speakers. You can do so in the Q&A function. If you want to pose questions to a specific speaker, you can indicate that, and we will get to the answers together after everyone has spoken in the final part of our session. So with that, I'm handing it over to Erik, please.
Thank you so much, Jan. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. So I've been asked to give a very short introduction to the High Seas Treaty in the Arctic, and this introduction is based on a report titled The High Seas Treaty, Implications and Opportunities for the Arctic that I've drafted for WWF Global Arctic Program during the last months. And this report will be released next Wednesday. Next slide, Vicky. And so in this very short presentation, about 10 minutes, I will give an introduction, focus on the treaty's application in the Arctic, its 4 substantive parts, the not undermining clause, and then a focus on area-based measures in Arctic areas beyond national jurisdiction. Next slides, please. The High Seas Treaty is an important new addition to the intergovernmental architecture for the governance of the world's seas and oceans. It has the potential of significantly enhancing the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity worldwide. This treaty is the 3rd so-called implementing agreement under the UNCLOS, the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. It focuses on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction, or ABNJ. It addresses various gaps and shortcomings in the UNCLOS and the Law of the Sea more generally, particularly in light of the deteriorating status of marine biodiversity and ecosystems worldwide. The climate crisis is among the main causes and drivers of this deterioration, and its impacts are especially pronounced in the Arctic. The treaty will enter into force once 60 states have formally adhered to it through ratification or otherwise. As of today, 7 states have done this. None of the 8 Arctic states are among these, but all of them, except Russia, have signed the treaty. And it's at the moment, the Arctic 7 are preparing to become parties to the treaty. Next slide, please. So the treaty applies only to ABNJ. As most of you will know, ABNJ consists of the high seas, which is the water column beyond exclusive economic zones, and the international seabed, or the so-called area, which is the seabed beyond continental shelves. And in the Arctic, and as Vicky has shown in the map, there are 4 pockets or enclaves of high seas, and probably 1 pocket of the area. The 4 high seas pockets are the so-called banana hole in the Norwegian Sea, the so-called loophole in the Barents Sea, the so-called donut hole in the central Bering Sea, and the high seas portion of the Central Arctic Ocean. So if the seabed underlying the high seas portion of the Central Arctic Ocean will have a pocket over the area, how large it will be, and where it will be situated is still unclear at the moment. This is mainly due to the involving submissions of Russia to the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf. Next slide, please. So the treaty has 4 substantive parts. So part 2, which is on marine genetic resources, including the fair and equitable sharing of benefits. Part 3, measures such as area-based management tools, or ABMTs, including marine protected areas, MPAs. And then part 4, environmental impact assessments, or EIAs. And part 5, capacity building and the transfer of marine technology. These 4 parts form a so-called package deal between developed states, which are or were mainly interested in parts 3 and 4, and developing states, which are primarily interested in parts 2 and 5. Part 3 provides a concrete new tool that can contribute to achieving Target 3 of the 2022 Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, to establish protected and conserved areas on 30% of land and sea by 2030. Next slide, please. So it's important to emphasize that the treaty's 4 substantive parts do not comprehensively govern all human activities in or impacts on areas beyond national jurisdiction. For instance, parts 3 and 4 deal only with all human activities through the tools of ABMTs, MPAs, and EIAs. This means that the so-called new regimes in parts 2 to 5 of the treaty must be aligned with the many global and regional regimes that already exist. This is reflected in the so-called not undermining clause in Article 5.2 of the treaty. This provision is operationalized further in other parts. The text of Article 5.2 is shown on the screen. As you will see by the underlined text, it has both a negative and a positive component. So it stipulates that a treaty must not undermine relevant legal instruments and frameworks and relevant global, regional, sub-regional, and sectoral bodies, or IFBs, and must at the same time promote coherence and coordination with those IFBs. It remains unclear what qualifies as an IFB and what does not. This lack of clarity is particularly relevant for the Arctic Council, which is a high-level intergovernmental forum established by a non-legally binding declaration, the 1996 Ottawa Declaration. As is well known, the Arctic Council currently does not have the competence to adopt decisions that impose legally binding obligations on its members. However, rather than having to qualify as an IFB under the High Seas Treaty as such or as a whole, a body can also qualify as an IFB for certain roles under the treaty, but not for other roles. This applies directly to the Arctic Council, and that will be emphasized later. Next slide, please. So the report that I mentioned earlier, and which will be released shortly, next Wednesday, I think, it examines the competence and practice of global regimes to adopt area-based measures in Arctic ABNJ, and the competence and practice of regional regimes to adopt these measures in areas beyond national jurisdiction in the Central Arctic Ocean. This is done in the context of Article 22 of the High Seas Treaty. This provision operationalizes the not undermining clause in relation to area-based measures. The underlying intention of Article 22 seems to be that the treaty's conference of the parties, so the COP, must only refrain from adopting legally binding measures in case IFBs also have such competence, and not if IFBs can merely adopt non-legally binding measures. Of the global regimes examined in relation to Arctic ABNJ, only the International Maritime Organization, the International Seabed Authority, and the International Whaling Commission have the competence to adopt area-based measures in ABNJ that impose legally binding restrictions on human activities. However, neither has exercised that competence in Arctic ABNJ so far. So the report also examines 4 regional regimes and their competence and practice to adopt area-based measures in areas beyond national jurisdiction. In these say, oh, there are too many acronyms in this presentation. So it focuses on the Arctic Council, the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission, and the OSPAR Commission. All of them, except the Arctic Council, have competence to adopt area-based measures that impose legally binding restrictions on human activities. In areas beyond national jurisdiction in the Central Arctic Ocean, however, only NEAFC has exercised that competence so far. Next slide, please. So this state of play reveals significant opportunities to make full use of the competence of these global and regional regimes to adopt area-based measures in Arctic ABNJ. Initiatives to achieve this should be developed now, not only after the treaty has entered into force. In parallel with the preparatory work on procedural and institutional matters that will soon be undertaken by the treaty's preparatory commission, initiatives should aim at anticipatory implementation of the treaty on substantive matters. One example of such an initiative is developing a concrete pilot proposal for a multi-sectoral ABMT or MPA in high seas portion of the Central Arctic Ocean. While awaiting the treaty's entry into force, the single sectoral components and measures of an envisaged overarching multi-sectoral proposal could be submitted in a coordinated fashion to all relevant global and regional bodies, including in particular IMO and the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, COP. Once these sectoral processes have led to a harmonized outcome and the High Seas Treaty has entered into force, the overarching proposal with the sectoral outcomes could be submitted for consideration and adoption by the treaty, COP. This will ensure that the proposed measures will become binding on all parties to the High Seas Treaty. The active engagement by Arctic states in initiatives such as these would underscore their proactive leadership and stewardship in the marine Arctic and put the High Seas Treaty on a clear path towards fulfilling its promise of success. That concludes it. Thank you. I look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much, Eric, and good that you laid out where we currently are, and that, of course, many things will need to happen before the treaty enters into force and afterwards, but already suggesting possible avenues, what could happen in the Arctic, and we'll get into this with our speakers that will look from their standpoint. And as you said, the report that you have written for us will be launched together with the video recording of our birthday party on Wednesday, the 19th of June. So you will be able to read in full Eric's remarks. So thanks a lot again, Eric. Let me move on to our next speaker. And it gives me a great pleasure to welcome Sara Olsvik, the International Chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, and a remarkable figure in the Arctic policy spheres with a long political career. The Inuit Circumpolar Council is one of the 6 permanent participants of the Arctic Council. It represents approximately 180,000 Inuit of Alaska, Canada, Greenland, and Chukotka in Russia. And we will be very eager to hear from you, Sara, how you see the Inuit's perspective in the High Seas Treaty implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Qoyanarlu ullumikut isumaqatiissutip issittup imavittaata aqunneqarnera pillu isumaqatiissutip nalliuttorsior tigineqarnerani qaaqqusigassi. Thank you so much for the invitation to this birthday party for the Central Arctic Oceans, or the High Seas Treaty, which is a very important treaty for Inuit and all Arctic peoples. And thank you also for organizing this event. I think it's timely and important to remind ourselves of where we are at. The road is always long from the good intentions and the 20 years of negotiations, and an agreement signed but not fully ratified yet poses even greater challenges in terms of implementing the good intentions behind an agreement such as this one. So I wanted to begin with highlighting a few points that I think are important for us to continue to build on and keep in our minds as we pursue the further the more that more states actually do ratify and pursue the full implementation of the treaty. First of all, I see this treaty as one of the good examples developed on the basis and full recognition of the rights of indigenous peoples. We do see along the UN and throughout the UN a big challenge when it comes to the recognition that we have built through decades and decades of work and advocacy for the rights of indigenous people to be recognized within the UN system's own Human Rights Council and under the General Assembly and under ECOSOC in New York, so in Geneva and New York. And we do see a big challenge in implementing those principles and rights throughout the UN system under other UN agencies and under other UN treaties, including treaties such as this one. So of course this treaty affirms the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in its preambular paragraphs is a very, very important aspect of the treaty. This is actually a way of elevating the rights of indigenous peoples into a legally binding instrument, building on a declaration that some say is not legally binding. We see as a universal declaration, so the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is own legitimacy because of the number of states that have endorsed the declaration. So this is an example of the hard work that has been needed to be done within the UN system after the adoption of the UN Declaration in 2007, and in a way being done in the way that I think many people envisioned when we were there in Geneva, negotiating the rights, being recognized. So the affirmation of the UN Declaration in the preambular paragraph is of course one step, but we do also see references and recognition of the rights of indigenous peoples within the provisional paragraphs. And I would especially like to highlight Article 7 K, where we do see a very nice way of saying how we see indigenous people's rights being different from those of local communities, which is a term that we often see conflated with indigenous peoples, also throughout the rest of this treaty. So I think that this treaty is one example of a good improvement and a good attempt of implementing the rights of indigenous peoples. And we will be working very hard, and I think everybody around this table today are obliged and should be working very hard on the actual implementation happening in an even stronger way than we see reflected in the text. Because of course, the rights of indigenous peoples include the right of self-determination, includes the rights of fully and effectively participating in decision-making, which is different from quote unquote, just being consulted. So I think that we see some very important positive steps in terms of building in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in a new treaty that also elevates these rights. But we also see a long road ahead of us to fully implement the full set of rights that we see enshrined in the UN Declaration in a treaty such as this one when it relates to high seas. Of course, any efforts to ensure the health of our oceans is also an effort to ensure the health of our peoples. And I think that with especially focusing on the Arctic oceans, both the Central Arctic Ocean, but also the seas around our homelands, and the health of those seas cannot happen without the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples from the Arctic, and especially Inuit, if it's going to be fully reflective of the lives of those who live there in the Arctic, for example. So this is also a good opportunity to take steps to further protect and further safeguard the health of our oceans, and thereby also safeguard and protect the health of our peoples. With that said, I think it's also important that we continue to remember that indigenous peoples of the Arctic and Inuit are here, and we have been here for millennia, and we have developed our societies and peoples for millennia, and will continue to do so. So the interests in governing the Arctic Ocean and interest in governing the marine environment is not just an interest we have because we think it's funny to be at the international meetings. It's an interest we have because it is about our lives, it is about our children, it is about our ability to sustain ourselves and govern ourselves in a world where we still live in state structures that were imposed upon us by colonization. So here I think we share also a big responsibility to not just have the nice words on paper, but also to do the actual work in ensuring that those rights of self-determination are then also implemented in the way that we govern the seas and lands around us. And also that we challenge the state-based system and challenge it in terms of being sure to implement and be able to accommodate those peoples that are not structured within states as peoples, such as indigenous peoples, but also the self-governing nations around the Arctic, such as Greenland and other self-governing nations. I finally also wanted to just talk very briefly about the interconnectedness of these different treaties and bodies and instruments that are built within the UN and outside of the UN. You already did that to a large extent in terms of marine governance, but the UNFCCC and the CBD and other treaties and instruments that are built within the UN, we see different kinds of challenges in implementing the rights of indigenous peoples. And currently we are working with concerted efforts with indigenous peoples from all over the world to end the conflation of indigenous peoples with local communities. And we are building policies and strategies within those different treaties and within those different bodies through our caucuses to make it very clear for states what the problem is when we conflate indigenous peoples with local communities or other groups, so-called groups, or terms that are not legally binding terms or terms of legal art. And this is a challenge I see with this treaty, as I said in the beginning. And I really hope that we will be able to ensure that there's a coherence in the way that we work on implementing a treaty such as this with how we are working under the other treaties, and also build on those efforts that are done by indigenous peoples to truly recognize the distinctness of indigenous peoples and our rights, and make sure that everybody around the table are aware of what the issues are when we conflate indigenous peoples with other terms that are not terms of legal art. And I think that will be a challenge since there is a lot of conflation throughout the treaty, except from in Article 7K. So please look at Article 7K and understand that we do not want the conflation. The issue with it is that if states implement and, for example, say that they have already consulted a local community, then that local community might not be the indigenous people of that land. And thereby that indigenous people's right of self-determination and participation in decision-making might not have been fulfilled. And we do see around the world that such a conflation and sort of intended or unintendedly way of shortcutting ways of taking decisions do happen. And this we have to take very concrete steps to end. And therefore I call on you also to take part in that work together with us and other indigenous peoples around the world. But I look forward to the dialogue, and thank you so much for the invitation. Qujanaq.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And before you disappear, I want to point to the picture that is behind you, and that I think very well illustrates your thinking about the holistic approach to how we are protecting oceans. And this is the Inuit perspective, and I think that is something that we can also have in our minds together with your words about the key issues that you see as we move forward on the High Seas Treaty. So thank you again. Let me now move to our next speaker. We will zoom in on the Arctic Council now with Katrin Nissen. Katrin is the Deputy Director in the Danish Environmental Protection Agency, and she is the chair of one of the working groups of the Arctic Council, the protection of Arctic marine environment. The group is overseeing the Arctic Council's activities relating to the protection and sustainable use of the Arctic environment, and we'll be keen to hear from you, Katrin. Where do you see the Arctic Council on the map of interactions for the High Seas Treaty? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jan, and thank you for the invitation and also for hosting this birthday party. And we're glad to be here, and I'm glad to be here and give a little bit reflections on the PAIM, the role of PAIM, and how we can feed into the process of the BBNJ. So maybe just to explain a little bit, you mentioned it as well, Jan, to reiterate, what is PAIM? Well, PAIM is one of 6 working groups of the Arctic Council. We focus on the conservation and sustainable use of the Arctic marine environment. We serve as a focal point of the Arctic Council's policy-related initiatives to this end. And we do that by providing expert reports, reviewing trends, making recommendations, various assessments, compiling data, best practices, etc. So why is this important to say? Well, it's important because it explains a little bit about how we can actually underpin the BBNJ instrument. And I think actually that in this context, PAIM has a unique character. So we have participation of all Arctic states, both of Canada, Kingdom of Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Russia, and the US. So this makes us unique in this context as well. We are driven by consensus, and we have a very strong engagement of permanent participants who are at the table. And I think as well that the intervention by Sarah Olsvik also stressed the importance of this and how valuable and important it is. We also have participation of observer states and organizations, NGOs, international intergovernmental organizations, etc. And as outlined as well by Molinar, then we are not a regulatory body. We are based on voluntary commitments. But where are the Arctic Council for the moment, and where is PAIM of the moment? Because I think that's also important, thinking a little bit ahead. Well, we have had a strategic pause, as you all know. And we are now in the phase of resuming our work at working group level, but virtually. And I think it's important just to explain the background a little bit, because we have not yet had the chance to have a strategic discussion regarding how PAIM can feed into the process of the BBNJ and underpin the work. But what I can say is that there are many of the Arctic Council states who are in the process of preparing their ratification. So maybe the BBNJ only has 7 full-fledged parents for the moment, but I'm quite confident that when you host a birthday in a year's time, the 2-year birthday, there will be more full-fledged parents, and I think as well there will be some Arctic states among these parents. So I think we need to be optimistic on that terms, but things take time, and preparing ratification nationally is something that just takes time. So the work plan of PAIM has been extended because of this strategic pause until 25, which means that when we concluded our work plan, the BBNJ agreement was not concluded. So that this is why that the BBNJ as such is not reflected in the work plan. But we are just embarking on the process of developing a new work plan for 25 to 27. And I think it will be a key element we need to discuss exactly how we will address PAIM, or how we will address BBNJ, and how PAIM can link to the upcoming work within the BBNJ. Because the BBNJ is an important driver to meet the targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework, and especially Target 3 regarding 30% protection of the ocean on a global scale. So I'm quite confident that PAIM and also other relevant working groups of the Arctic Council will offer ourselves in a relevant manner to actually underpin the work of the BBNJ. And this is not only something that lies in the future, but we already have a number of building blocks which has been produced within PAIM, which I think actually can form a basis for the forthcoming work in the BBNJ. And we really need to maximize the synergies, and we need to build on the work already done. So what are these building blocks? What am I talking about? Well, we have a number of projects and programs, etc. And we have projects linked to marine protected areas, to OECMs, other effective area-based conservation measures in the Arctic marine environment. We have a number of projects and activities regarding indigenous and local knowledge. We have a synthesis report on ecosystem status, human impact and management measures in the Central Arctic Ocean. We have projects regarding oceanographic connectivity on ecosystem-based approach, and also a number of data-related projects. And I think especially it's worth mentioning the ASTD, the Arctic Shipping Traffic Database. So many of these projects can actually feed into the process of the BBNJ and form a basis for that work. So looking a little bit ahead on the role of PAIM within the context of the BBNJ and how we can feed into the process, I think I want to reiterate that we have a unique point of departure in PAIM because we have a structured dialogue with all relevant partners, including Arctic states, permanent participants, observers, etc. Although we cannot adopt regulatory binding instruments, we have a strong role which we can play as facilitators, and we can bring different actors together and develop necessary assessments, synthesizing scientific data, and including indigenous and local knowledge, etc. So I really think that we, by developing these building blocks and both making use of the existing one, but also developing new ones, that we can bring this work to the table of the BBNJ, and that can serve as a basis for further discussion within the BBNJ. And by this, we can make optimal use of our efforts. So, I mean, I think it's still early days. It's a small baby. It's only 1 year old. And I think when you look at babies, just in general, I mean, it's also always very interesting to learn how will they develop, which kind of grown-ups will they be, what competences, what personalities, etc. And I think we all very curious, and we all want to facilitate the development of the BBNJ. So I think we in PAIM as well, we can't wait until the baby takes the first step and we can see what kind of personality the BBNJ will have. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And yes, now we have 7 parents, and I would too hope that in 1 year from now there will be many more. And of course, as with babies, it is very important how the parents can help them in the initial years. So I hope that the many parents who come with good intentions will be able to help a fruitful life of what is today almost a 1-year-old baby. Thank you again for all participants. If you wish to pose any questions to any of the speakers, you can do so in the Q&A function. And let me now move to our next speaker. We will be moving from the Arctic Council to a broader constituency with more parties, and that is the OSPAR. Dominic Pattinson is the Executive Secretary and the head of the OSPAR Secretariat. The OSPAR was established in 2022. OSPAR established the Arctic Outcomes Working Group that should deliver the Arctic Outcomes Roadmap, which should guide the OSPAR's work to protect the marine environment in the Arctic area of the OSPAR maritime area. And we will be keen to hear from you, Dominic, where OSPAR stands at the moment and how it can be one of the parents for the High Seas Treaty. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jan, and thank you for inviting me to the birthday party. I'm very pleased with my present. I love maps. I spent ages mucking about with that map already. So yeah, you've got one very happy participant already. I love all the analogies to babies and parents and things. I see the agreement as already a teenager. It's taken 20 years. It's either had a very long pregnancy or it's already been sort of hanging around for 20 years and is ready to break free. And more seriously, I think we're at a really important stage of the BBNJ agreement and the process of how that will be implemented in the future. I think we've already heard, and really pleased to have heard, that people are already thinking that we should be preparing for that implementation for when we have the full ratification of the agreement. So, but just to step back a bit. So just as you said, I'm Dominic Pattinson. I'm the Executive Secretary at OSPAR, which is the Commission for the Protection of Marine Environment of the North East Atlantic. I'm going to be speaking, I think, as Katrine said, it is still early days for countries in terms of the implementation agreement. So I'm going to be speaking from a largely personal perspective. I don't think OSPAR contracting parties have a formally agreed common position, other than to say that they all really welcome the adoption of the BBNJ agreement and they are all working for its rapid implementation. And that it aligns well with OSPAR's existing mandate. So I think we kind of saw this as a kind of a big brother, big sister to the OSPAR convention. Just for those that don't know OSPAR, we're a regional sea convention. We look after the North East Atlantic. And I think importantly for this discussion is 40% of our maritime area is in areas beyond national jurisdiction. A lot of that in the wider Atlantic, but some of that, as we saw on the map, in the Arctic region. And our region 1, we have 5 regions, but our region 1 is mainly Arctic water. So it goes from the North Pole down to the southern tip of Greenland and then across to Norway. So so this event today is really really important. And as you mentioned, yeah, we have a particular focus, a work stream, an Arctic Outcomes Working Group that is looking to see how we can do better at protecting the marine environment of the Arctic, in collaboration, in coordination with all of the other interested parties in that region. I wanted to touch on sort of three aspects in this brief intervention. One is the not undermining clause that we've already heard about. The one that sort of goes along with that, I think, is the one around coordination and cooperation. I think Kirsten put it as sort of the binding us together part of the BBNJ agreement. And then maybe touch on some sort of ideas for future models of engagement going forward. Just to say that OSPAR, and as I think Professor Molinar said, OSPAR has the capacity to agree legally binding decisions, but only binding on its contracting parties. And I think that's an important sort of distinction to make in relation to something that is a global treaty. And it's also important to recall the point about that we only have a mandate for certain things. So we don't have a mandate for fisheries management measures. We don't have a mandate for deep seabed mining, and we don't have a mandate, as I'm sure Frederick will point out, for shipping activities. But we do have this wider mandate for protection of the marine environment, and inevitably those things come together, and we need to find ways of how we make sure that our respective mandates are respected. I think that sort of is where the not undermining clause comes in. I think it's a key element of the agreement, I think, and I think how it will be used going forward will be crucial to the effectiveness of the agreement. I found that during the negotiations and since the agreement has been adopted, I've often heard it said that the BBNJ won't really impact on some IFBs, some international frameworks and bodies, because it can't undermine them. So we don't need to worry about it. It's, you need to respect our mandate, and the BBNJ agreement won't impinge on those mandates. And that in any case, those bodies are already have mandates to protect the marine environment. My worry about that is that people won't take advantage of the opportunities of the BBNJ agreement. So at the same time, we have this biodiversity crisis, and the existing sort of situation, the status quo, hasn't been working. So we really need to make sure that the undermining clause isn't used as an excuse for inaction, and actually we use it to make sure that we respect the mandates of those IFBs that protect the marine environment as well. The second important aspect of the agreement is the binding us together bit, the cooperation, coordination, the need to work with others. And I think that's something that OSPAR has long recognised, and I think we see the BBNJ agreement as something that only reinforces that need for cooperation and coordination. So, as I said, we can't impose fisheries management measures, but we can work with NIAF to sort of agree, where fisheries management measures might be best needed. So I know I'm talking for too long, so I'll try and speed up a little bit. Yeah, just in terms of going forward, I think this idea of the BBNJ really gives us some impetus to sort of work more closely together with other bodies. And in OSPAR, we have something called the collective arrangement, where we work not only with NIAF, but with other competent bodies, where we just come together and talk about issues and try and find common solutions to things. And we've really made good progress on that. And I think partly due to the fact that the BBNJ agreement is coming. So parties, countries, organizations know that they need to work together. And I've just come back from a meeting in Korea, the Sustainable Ocean Initiative, which is looking at those same issues, the same bodies at a global level. So I think we have a model for how to work going forward. And I guess the three takeaways that I would leave with you is that let's use the BBNJ agreement to bring people to the table. Let's use it. Let's be as inclusive as possible. I think Sarah's points were very relevant in that context. Let's co-develop, co-design measures, and let's start now. Let's not wait. I know people are saying ratification is not far away. There'll still be lots of discussions around processes and rules of procedure and things like that. I don't think we need to wait for those. We can start talking now and start to agree measures, so that when we get a COP, we can go there and say, hey guys, look what we've done. We all agree it. Can you give us the cherry on the cake and give us a BBNJ agreement? Thank you very much. Sorry if I went on too long.
Thanks a lot, Dominique. I think that that was helpful thoughts, including your summary of the 3 points. And you also referred to IMO, which has a broad membership, and that gives me a bridge to introduce our next speaker. Frederik Haag is the head of the Office of the London Convention Protocol and Ocean Affairs at the IMO. Frederik has a background in applied environmental research, has been focusing on marine and coastal zone management, and holds several postgraduate degrees. And he has been deeply involved in the UN 2030 SDGs and the BBNJ negotiations. So Frederik, welcome, and we are very happy to hear your perspective from the IMO. Over to you.
Thank you very, very much, Jan, and thank you for allowing me to make a few remarks on this birthday celebration. And I think I'll start with a few things. It might be a bit of repetition, but we were always very pleased as IMO to be part of the discussions and negotiations for the years leading up to the adoption of the agreement last year. And we maintained throughout the negotiation that this will be an instrument, that the instrument will be instrumental in reinforcing the global efforts to protect and sustainably use marine biodiversity in lines with both the 2030 agenda and the global framework for biodiversity. We participated through the negotiations, and we did so to provide information about how IMO operates and our mandate to support the process leading up to the adoption, because IMO and shipping as the biggest user of the world's oceans and seas will need to continue to participate and play a role in the implementation of the new instrument. Because international shipping is the biggest user of the surface of the ocean and sea, so any activities conducted from vessels include voyages carrying goods, but also fishing, tourism, exploration or exploitation of resources, etc., and scientific research. And IMO, we have been around a long time. It's as an international organization, more than 75 years. And we have a long history of contributing to the governance of our ocean. And last year adoption coincided with the celebration of 50 years of MARPOL. And the year before that, we have 50 years of the London Convention, both landmark events. And I think that also shows the environmental focus of IMO and how we try to lean in and contribute to the discussions. We have a specific mandate, but it does include both international shipping and the prevention of pollution from dumping and waste at sea. What is quite important in the context for us, I think, is to remember that in principle, our regulatory framework and how we regulate shipping applies to ships wherever they operate on the seas. Regardless of where a ship is, it has to be in compliance. And many of the more than 50 conventions and hundreds of codes and guidelines we developed over the years, they deal directly or indirectly with the protection of biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. One of the IMO processes and tools that have been mentioned a lot is particularly sensitive sea areas, PSSAs, as an area-based management tools. And this is a tool that's been around since 1990 and can incorporate any IMO measure that we have under our disposal to protect the marine environment. They're already available under IMO, and they can be applied in the high seas, even if, for example, PSSA has so far only been applied within the EEZ, but there are ongoing discussion in several regions, including high seas areas, regarding possible PSSAs beyond the EEZ. I'm mentioning this because I think it brings this together something that is my final point at the end of these few remarks, and that is that the work of organizations such as IMO and the tools and processes and treaties that we have developed, they have always been done so in dialogue and not in isolation. We are one of the cogs in the wheel that make up the governance of the ocean. But the IMO tools are effective because they, for example, in the context of PSSAs, when they identify a vulnerable area, we specifically regulate the activity that may have an impact on it. In this case, international shipping. So we ensure a balance between delivery of goods and world trade and the protection of the marine environment. Now, in the months ahead and the years ahead, we will move from negotiation to ratification and implementation of the new instrument. And as IMO, we will continue taking part in all the preparatory processes for the implementation and preparing for the entry into force. It's been a long journey. Some of us have been part of it. I haven't been part of the whole journey, but a chunk of it. And I think what we now still need to do is understanding how this will work in practice. And I think it's something like the events today and processes of dialogue and communication like we're doing today they will continue to be crucial, because we do need to understand each other and lay the framework and the ground firmly for how we apply this new agreement. And only by understanding each other better can we assure that the agreement will work in practice. And as I mentioned, these cogs, they do need to smoothly fit into each other and build on each other the best way possible. I think Katrine said earlier that the agreement is still a young baby and that it's still early days. And I think that's true, but we need to continue sharing experiences. We need to continue to try to understand how the global regulatory framework applies vis-a-vis the BBNJ agreement, including on the high seas. And from IMO's side, we do have a dialogue both at the global level and the regional level with regional bodies, and of course a global national membership of member states, which will be of continuous importance when we have these discussions. And we do need to further strengthen our cooperation with all the stakeholders that will play a role in the implementation of the BBNJ agreement. We do have a lot of experience, and we have continuously shared this throughout the decades leading up to the adoption, and we will continue to do so in the preparation for the implementation. And I look forward to hearing the discussion today and continue our very good dialogue with all of you who are here to celebrate the birthday today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Frederick. And I would almost say that we were talking with the parents, and now a grandparent came to the family, which has even more wisdom and long-term experience, and that will be also valuable as we are together shaping how the new baby will be doing. So thank you for sharing your thoughts based on your participation. Coming from a grandparent to someone who is, I don't know if we can call a parent, but we will zoom in on one of the youngest instruments, and that's the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement. And a great pleasure to welcome here Nadia Bouffard, the president of the Conference of Parties. Nadia has just come from the third Conference of Parties in Incheon, Korea, where several of us met, and has been working over 20 years for the Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and holding an extensive knowledge from the fisheries management, and she has been leading the CALFA work since 2019. And we will be eager to hear from you, Nadia, how you see the baby from the CALFA perspective. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jen. So hi, everybody, and apologize for the glare. I'm not sure what to do about it, so I'd rather focus on engaging with you today and give you my remarks than trying to fix this thing. Thank you to WWF for inviting me to be part of this event to celebrate an important milestone in the High Seas Treaty, or BBNJ, as many of us still call it. While I'm retired from the Canadian Public Service and the views I will express today are mine, I have spent more than 30 years working in fisheries management and policy in the Canadian government, domestically and at the international level, developing various international agreements and tools since the UN Law of the Sea Convention was adopted, including the BBNJ Treaty. I see the BBNJ Treaty as an additional tool to help the world better manage human activities in international waters and on the seabed beyond coastal states' jurisdiction. As Eric and others have done, I think it's important to highlight the various clauses in the treaty that require its parties not to undermine existing applicable regimes. I see the usefulness of BBNJ, especially to address gaps that currently exist in these areas where existing regimes do not have the tools to protect or conserve biodiversity, and where there are regimes in place to manage human activities, such as fishing, and they have authority to mitigate the impacts of these activities on marine biodiversity. The BBNJ process can be helpful in working with and within these regimes to improve the protection and conservation of biodiversity. As chairperson of the Conference of the Parties to the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, one of my roles is to help the 10 parties implement their commitments under the agreement. The first and foremost commitment is to ensure that no unregulated fishing occur in the Central Arctic Ocean. And to effect this, the parties have agreed that they will not commercially fish in this area until, at a minimum, 2037. At that time, they can agree to extend this by 5-year increments. And if at that time there's enough fish biomass to sustain a commercial fishery in the Central Arctic Ocean, and we know that's not the case today, the parties may agree to create a regional fisheries management organization to manage such fisheries. While the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement is focused on prohibiting one type of human activity. It does cover the entire Central Arctic Ocean high seas area. And in fact, science associated and in support of any measures go beyond the high seas portion of Central Arctic Ocean. So that's important to flag at this point. All of this, of course, in terms of the area, which will be placed in a prohibition to fish for a very long time. So I think that the CALFA agreement, which is the acronym we use, could in and of itself easily be considered as an area-based measure under the BBNJ Treaty. When you consider how the agreement was developed, who was around the table and who continues to be at the table today, and the various enabling provisions and roles of the parties provided by the agreement, you could conclude that many of the requirements of the BBNJ Treaty in respect of area-based measures and environmental impact assessments can be achieved by and through CALFA. Equally important is the CALFA party's legal commitment to collect knowledge of the Central Arctic Ocean area from scientific, local, and indigenous sources to have a better sense of what impacts fishing could have in the area before fishing actually occurs. This is a textbook example of applying the precautionary approach. And in my experience, there's a lot of scientific work being done in the Arctic. The work underway in CALFA will tap into existing sources of knowledge and data, and it will collect its own more fisheries-focused knowledge as well. The parties to BBNJ should recognize this and tap into it and not try to duplicate it. Since the CALFA agreement was signed in 2018, the parties have been working on a number of tools to advance the implementation of the agreement. When the agreement entered into force in 2023, the parties formed a Conference of the Parties as their principal body to make decisions. They've met annually since then. The most recent meeting was held last week in Incheon, South Korea. Last year, at its second COP meeting, the parties adopted a framework for the Joint Program of Scientific Research and Monitoring, or JPSRM, as we call it. They also adopted a resolution recognizing the significant impacts that climate change is and will continue to have in the Arctic, and in particular to Central Arctic Ocean ecosystems and their people. And they recognize the need to factor these changes in their work. Last week, the CALFA COP adopted an implementation plan that provides details on how they will implement the JPSRM and begin sharing and collecting data and knowledge. In fact, I shouldn't say begin sharing because they have been sharing much available data as it is. These important documents outline how the parties to CALFA will work together to gather important knowledge of the Central Arctic Ocean and which area and issues they will prioritize and target in this work. While the parties have acknowledged that information regarding the high seas portion of the Arctic Ocean is scarce, they are not working from scratch, nor are they working alone. Cooperation and sharing is key to meeting the objectives set out in the JPSRM, including not only among the parties, but as well with other organizations such as ICES, Pisces, OSPAR, and the Arctic Council, and notably with Inuit and local knowledge holders. Data and knowledge sources will include the parties' respective science programs, indigenous and local knowledge produced jointly pursuant to the JPSRM, and data information collected from exploratory fishing, which may only occur subject to very restrictive conditions to be laid out in measures that the COP has committed to adopt by next year's COP meeting. The inclusion of Indigenous participants and the unique knowledge they hold of the area has been entrenched as an obligation in the agreement, one of the first treaties to do so. Inuit participants have been at the table since the beginning of the process during the treaty negotiations, and they continue to be involved at all levels of the CALFA processes. I think that Inuit participation in CALFA should meet some of the Indigenous engagement requirements of the BBNJ. While it's premature to discuss the content of measures that the COP will be considered at its next meeting in 2025 in respect of exploratory fishing, it is certainly possible for the parties to agree to include impact assessments prior to authorizing exploratory fishing, which could meet the BBNJ requirements. And so in conclusion, in a very short time, at least in international fora terms, the 10 parties to the CALFA, which includes the 5 coastal states to the Central Arctic Ocean, have reached agreements and taken steps towards protecting and conserving the ecosystems and biodiversity of the Central Arctic Ocean from fishing activities, many of which meet the requirements of BBNJ. Perhaps the international community should let the CALFA parties continue their work while the CALFA area-based management tool is in place in respect of fisheries activities, and instead concentrate their effort on trying to influence and help other international bodies who have authority to manage other human activities in the Arctic Ocean, but haven't taken such area-based measures yet. Certainly that's something that they should take advantage while countries consider their accession to the treaty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadia, for giving us the state of play of the implementation of CALFA and how it directly relates to the requirements of the High Seas Treaty. And it will be encouraging to see the next steps in the implementation and how the linkages can be even more strengthened. Thank you to all the other panelists. You still have an opportunity to pose questions. We will have some few minutes at least for a discussion. But before going there, we have asked one other person to share with us very brief remarks. And here I would like to introduce someone who might not need introduction, David Balton. Dave is the Executive Director of the Arctic Executive Steering Committee in the White House. And formerly, he was the U.S. Arctic Ambassador. He was the chair of the senior Arctic officials and also a key figure in negotiating CALFA and other international instruments. And we've asked we've asked David to give us a few reflections on what he has heard, and then we will go back to our panelists. Dave, please.
Thanks very much, Jan, and thanks to WWF for organizing this event. I don't actually have that much to add to all the things that other speakers have offered. In fact, I think I just want to make one point. Picking up on what Eric Molinar and others have said, this period of time between today and when the BBNJ agreement, yes, I still call it that too, enters into force, may be a very critical time. In an ideal world, the preparatory process would be a robust one, and that the signatories would be working together to prepare a slate of decisions that could be considered and possibly adopted at the first COP. Now, whether any such decision relating to the Arctic should rise to the top of that is not clear. There is a lot already happening in the Arctic, as we have heard, and yet it is at least worth considering whether there are gaps in Arctic governance and areas beyond national jurisdiction there that the BBNJ process can help to fill. And probably it is those organizations and states who are most concerned about the Arctic that would need to drive any such consideration during the preparatory process. Again, there may be other areas of the world's oceans beyond national jurisdiction that are more in need of protection even, but at least the Arctic should be considered in the mix. I encourage everybody involved in the Arctic to at least consider carefully that question through the preparatory process. Thanks again for inviting me to the birthday party. I hand it back to Jan.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Dave. And indeed, engaging those who are most concerned makes a lot of sense. Let me now bring in all the panelists, and I would maybe have one question to all of you as we have listened to each and every one. And maybe building on what Dave just said about this critical period before the agreement enters into force. Obviously, there will be the global process. The preparatory committee or commission meeting is taking place next week, and that will deal with all the institutional preparations and the rules, etc. But obviously, we need to be looking at the substance. And if there was one thing that you think, irrespective of your institutional hats, what should be happening most importantly in the Arctic space as we are preparing for the High Seas Treaty to come into force? So what would it be in this in this anticipatory implementation, having heard the discussion that you would recommend to focus on. I don't know who wants to take the first. Simple question, just one. Eric, please.
Yes, thank you, Jan. Yeah, I guess in my presentation, I highlighted this possibility of a pilot proposal, right? Where basically the members of the institutions would start working together to identify the sectoral components of such a broader proposal. So perhaps my fellow panel members have some ideas about this.
Thank you, Eric. Anyone else? Katrien, it's your hand, I think.
Yes. Well, just to be brief, I think what we need, one thing is the institutional regimes, and one thing is the frameworks, and all that is going on in the preparatory process, etc. But what we need to start is we need to start a dialogue on the common vision for the Arctic marine environment across Arctic Council and other regional bodies, etc. So I think actually just dialogue is a good place to start, and we need to come together. And I think when first we have started the dialogue on the common vision for the Arctic marine environment, where we not only talk about pressures, etc., also about management tools, we talk about, we have all actors together at the same table. I think that will be a very good starting point. And if we just reach that before within the first year, I think we're in a good place.
Thank you, Katrien. Thank you. Dominic, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Katrien. I was going to come in on the back of Eric's comments that a pilot project may be something a bit further down the line. As much as I would like us to be able to develop one of those, I think actually just starting that conversation and that dialogue, I've seen it in OSPAR, how long it takes to build up the trust, the knowledge, the sharing of experiences. I think Frederick sort of made the comment around sort of understanding each other. So I think that getting that dialogue started would be a really good, I mean, it doesn't sound much, but it is really important to just get that dialogue going to improve that understanding. And yeah, we've seen it in our Arctic Outcomes Working Group, how much we need to learn to go forward. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic. Nadia, please.
Thanks. I don't know how to trigger the hand up to seek the floor, so I'm using my actual
This is
hand.
perfectly good.
Okay. I agree with previous speakers that dialogue needs to be maintained. We're not starting, you know, it's been happening for many years for many of us. Perhaps to help in that dialogue, it would be useful to have a bit of a gap analysis. We have a text of a treaty. It would be useful to actually engage with different regimes to better understand them. I think Eric has done a good start on this, but I think a more detailed analysis of the actual gaps would help that dialogue along, and perhaps help eventually with a pilot.
Thank you for that idea. Sarah and her virtual hand.
Yes, Brianna. Well, I think also that I agree with everyone who are talking on the lines of not reinventing the wheel. And I think that we also do share a common challenge, especially applying to us as Indigenous peoples organizations, that we are often in a situation where we cannot apply our full potential because of lack of resources and lack of capacity. So a much better foundation under those who are the rights holders to be there at the table must also be a part of this. And this I also see as a global challenge for the global Indigenous peoples movement and organization, since this is also a global treaty. I do think that we should be addressing from the Arctic, of course, the Arctic Ocean's specific influence on the rest of the world's oceans and systems, And here in that also recognize Inuit's distinct status as an Arctic indigenous people with our relation to the ice and sea and around us, and the vast territory that we have traditionally owned and occupied along the Arctic coasts, including our relation to the seas, also the high seas. And in that, I think that we do have a continued challenge globally for these instruments to truly build a platform where indigenous peoples can participate from the beginning and not have to start from scratch in fighting for their right to participate. And here I would like to point to the UNFCCC system, where we do have the platform where indigenous peoples participate from, and the facilitative working group in terms of including the knowledge of indigenous peoples. And so again, not reinventing the wheel, but look at how indigenous peoples have been also, the drivers of development of institutions from which they participate. We co-founded the Arctic Council, and in the UN system, we already see some developments of institutional recognition of indigenous peoples, so that the result can be the best as possible for everyone. Bojana.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. Important remarks and additions to what the others have said. Right, I think that our time is up, unless Frederick has a final thought on this. Yes, okay, very quickly, please. Thank you.
No, very quickly, I just felt that the question were more specifically to those that are directly operating in the space. I thought I'll give the floor to others, but I just want to agree with what's been said by the previous speakers, and I appreciate that this could be a seed for further discussions on how to implement the treaty in a very specific region, but also making sure that all the sectors and stakeholders that are already having a role are included in that dialogue, which I think will be crucial for the success of the treaty in the Arctic as well. Thank you. Thanks
a lot, Frederick, and thank you very much, all of you, for your inputs. And I think that underlines the need for dialogue, and this can be one element of a future dialogue that we can figure. And with this, let me come to a final part of our program. And as I said, we will have a surprise, and the surprise has a name, and the name is Baba Brinkman, who will be doing a wrap-up for us. Baba is a Canadian by origin. He is a New York-based rap artist, and he specializes in translating science into art. And he has performed at major international environmental forums. I met with Baba first at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and Baba has been listening to our entire event. And during that listening, he composed a birthday song, which now he will perform for all of us. So one thing we would ask you, if you want to give Baba feedback about what you think, then you can turn your cameras on, and otherwise, please enjoy Baba's performance. Baba, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jan. And it's a real pleasure to be here. And just to foreshadow a little bit what I am about to do, it is a somewhat unique application of musical and lyrical art. I came into the meeting an hour and a half ago with a blank Word document and started taking notes on what everybody spoke on, and I composed a whole rap song over the past 90 minutes that references the various speakers and themes, and I learned a ton about the Global Arctic Treaty, which I knew absolutely nothing about prior to, well, except for, a few Wikipedia and Google search entries. So this is now going to be the official anthem for the Global Arctic Treaty's first birthday, and it was really composed special for this audience, and I dare say I may never perform this specific rap song again, because it is very special for this audience. So I hope you enjoy it a lot. And part of this is an exercise in solidarity, because I don't know what this rap says either. I had to write it so quickly, so you will be discovering it in real time at the same time as I discover it, and that's part of the fun, because you can tell that we're on a high wire act, and it's all very spontaneous. It's great to be here. Thank you, Jan, for making this possible for me to join you. All right, here we go. Yeah, Happy birthday. Happy birthday. Happy birthday. It's a party. It's a birthday greeting. It's a celebration plus a public policy meeting. 1 year after adoption, it wasn't easy, but we made it. Hey, there's a global Arctic treaty. It's a birthday bash, a blowout. It's a party, it's a celebration of the treaty for the global Arctic. It took a lot to get here, a road full of hardship, but we made it this far, so let's get the party started. It's the BBNJ, baby, so learn the diction. Biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. The building of an international coalition, Arctic marine protection as a global mission, and how better to celebrate that than with rap music inspired by Jan Duzik, catalyzing the movement to bring the global nations together and protect the rights of Arctic ecosystems and people. Let's get it ratified. Jan had it right. The treaty is for the Arctic. Right now it's been signed by the 7-nation army, but we need 60 ratifications, so let's do this. All the parties are called on to sign. Take it from Kirsten Stewart, it's a movement. This baby's taking its first steps. It's got 7 parents already nurturing, yes, but we gotta prepare to bring implementation action in. You heard it from Ospar, from Dominic Pattinson. The treaty is a toddler, but also a teenager. It's been around for decades. The process is being major. The protection of marine environments should not be this hard. Ospar is not the global marine cop car. It doesn't have a mandate to cover fishing or mining. That's why there's a clause attached, not undermining. So many treaties involved, from CAF to NEAF to CALFO to Sustainable Ocean Initiatives that just happened in Korea, IMO, the ArcNet priority areas, OSPAR. Can you help us sort it out, please? Eric Molinar, the treaty's full of benefits. That's what we're all gonna see. The 3rd version of the UN clause, that's the UN Convention on the Laws of the Sea, with brand new capacity building tools in the bag, even if some are covered by IMO. Take it from Frederick Hag. The global treaty has the full support of Frederick. He was like, yeah, because we've got like 50 conventions already, so what's one more? Frederick is one of the grandparents. This baby will thrive with a little bit of burden sharing and a multilateral mindset. That's how we go big with indigenous participation. Big up Sarah Olsvig from the Inuit Circumpolar Council. Is it fully integrated yet? Sarah was doubtful, but also hopeful that we can align beautifully if we stop conflating indigenous with local communities. Cooperation and sharing is key. Is that too hard? No more unregulated fishing either, said Nadia Buffard. Unsustainable fisheries are the type that collapse, so it's essential to restore the Arctic fish biomass. Don't give a cranky baby treaty a nap, give it a birthday present. An interactive map that shows how the treaties overlap. Resolve it with killer data visualization from Vicky Lee Walgren. The Arctic Executive Steering Committee has got this. The White House is with it. We heard it from Dave Balton. And that's how we go from the first step to the first hop to the full-on sprint ratification at the first COP. That ratification mission, that's an active decision to engage in the dialogue. Take it from Katrin Nissen at PAIM. The regimes, they can have a frame, but the common vision that makes our missions the same. There's no need to reinvent the wheel in the first place. The wheel is turning, and this here is his first birthday. Yeah, check it out. Now I think you've got the point, so give a shout out to all the speakers here who joined, cause it's the BBNJ, baby. We gotta learn the diction, biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, the building of an international coalition, Arctic marine protection. That's the global mission. It's a party, y'all. It's a birthday greeting. It's a celebration plus a public policy meeting. 1 year after adoption, it wasn't easy, but we made it. There's a global Arctic treaty. It's a birthday bash, a blowout. It's a party, a celebration of the treaty for the global Arctic. It took a lot to get here, a road full of hardship, but we made it this far. So let's get this party started. It's a party, baby, yeah. It's a birthday greeting. It's a celebration plus a public policy meeting. 1 year after adoption, it wasn't easy, but we made it. Hey, there's a global Arctic treaty. It's a birthday bash, a blowout. It's a party. It's a celebration of the treaty for the global Arctic. It took a lot to get here, a road full of hardship, but we made it this far. So let's get this party started. Thank you. That was a lot of fun to put together. I
Brilliant,
learned a lot,
brilliant.
and we'll be making a video and sharing it so that we can show the world what was discussed here, and everyone who's participating in this important movement. So thank you.
Baba, thank you very much. I think you saw a lot of white smiling faces, and it was a much better wrap up than any one of us would probably do. And I think that it has the inspiration for us all as we are paving the way. So I think that if we will remember this song that you just composed on the spot, that will make it easier to achieve what we want to. So thank you very much, everyone, for participation. You will see the recording, the song, the maps, and Eric's presentation coming out on Wednesday. And stay tuned for the continuation for the High Seas Treaty future. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so
you.
much. Bye bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good enough. Thank you.